Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about human rights and government policy. Welcome back, everyone, to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio, and I am your host, Michael Clogs. As we have heard that Canada has decided that they will boycott the Beijing Winter Olympics. While athletes will travel to Beijing to compete, there will be no diplomatic envoys to go along with that. As we know that China has been involved in many violations of human rights. They have systematically been trying to commit genocide against those who follow the Muslim faith in certain regions of China, isolating them from the rest of the country. That how they use social media to isolate and punish people. Many other things that fall under the UN regulations of what human rights are supposed to be. We also know that they arbitrarily arrested 2 Canadian citizens. We watched over the past almost 3 years as things developed with the Michaels, and we also watched the actions of Justin Trudeau and the Liberal federal government. Aaron O'Toole, in one of the segments you're going to hear, has questioned the ability of the Liberal government to deal with China. He asked the question of, this is only one of many things. What is it going to take to actually handle the Chinese government in a way that is more effective towards Canada, bringing more to Canada? He all but accused the Liberal government of allowing Canada to be China's doormat. Now it comes to the Olympics. There was much heated debate over if the boycott should happen, how it should be handled, and as we know, it is going to actually happen. There are other areas that we're going to hear around climate change and other things that need to happen along with what promises have been made by our government. So let's listen to the segments, and you determine how our government should be acting, and we'll see you for final comments. Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
For the Algonquin Nation. And before we begin, as New Democrats, we want to think of the women murdered at École Polytechnique, their families, the sacrifice, and the commitment that we need to make as Canadians to make sure that this kind of horrific violence against women and girls will never, ever be perpetrated again. So Prime Minister Trudeau goes to COP26 and makes a series of dramatic announcements to increase the targets that Canada had promised at Paris. But what he didn't tell the world is that the government has failed to meet any of the previous promises that he has made. In fact, the Environment Commissioner clearly wasn't buying the COP26 sales pitch because he blasted the Liberals for going from, quote, failure to failure in missing key climate change targets. The Liberals don't seem to understand that unless there is a clear financial commitment that includes workers and their families, Canada will continue to fail on the climate front. Concrete commitments to workers through investments in new clean energy and infrastructure projects will be key to meeting our targets. And it is even more essential for the government to utilize the skills of Canadian energy workers in order to build trust in this so-called just transition. We compare with Joe Biden, who went to COP26, where he promised massive financial investments in clean energy that is tied to what Joe Biden calls good paying union jobs. We have had no such language from the Prime Minister. What we did get were promises backed by a record of failure. For example, Mr. Trudeau at COP26 promised to decrease methane emissions by 75%. And yet his government isn't close to meeting their previous target of 45%. And what makes this so unacceptable is that the technology is available to drop methane emissions to near zero. The only thing we're missing right now, it appears, is political spine. Mr. Trudeau at COP26 promised an emissions cap on greenhouse gas emissions. So where is that cap? When does it start? What does it include? These are the questions that we need answers to because under his watch, emissions have continued to rise despite his positive rhetoric. Last week, Resource Minister Wilkinson told the House that Canada's environment record was the envy of the G7. This is simply not true. Since Trudeau made his promises at Canada, according to the Environment Commissioner, Canada has become the worst performer in the G7 nation. So why is this? Well, consider this. Right now, we are at the very bottom of the G20 when it comes to investments in renewable energy. We are down there with Russia and Saudi Arabia. So without those investments, we are never going to make our targets. And this brings us to the heart of the problem that's confronting Canada today. Because as an energy-producing nation, we cannot allow ourselves to be at the back of the pack when it comes to investing in clean tech. Over the last 4 years, we have seen major investment firms, insurers, and bondholders announcing that they are pulling out of Canada's energy sector because of the lack of action on climate change. So is this how Prime Minister Trudeau will manage the transition? By a steady bleed-off of investment and jobs. It is unconscionable that the government is failing to work with energy workers on transforming our economy to meet the challenges it faces, the urgent challenges we face right now. So what needs to be done? Well, the RBC has pegged the price of investments at $57 billion a year in clear and targeted investments. Clean Energy Canada states that the task will require Canada to undertake a massive investment in renewable energy. But the upside of this massive spending is that it will create 200,000 jobs, as compared to the situation now where we're just watching the bleed off of jobs. We're here this morning as New Democrats to say we will stand up for Canadian workers and the environment and at putting in place a plan to address catastrophic climate change. We will reach out our hand to the government and work with them because the stakes are so high. But to do this, the Prime Minister needs to understand that spin will not cut it. We need to work on a serious investment plan with commitments to make this change a reality. Le Premier ministre s'est rendu à la COP26 afin d'annoncer des engagements dramatiques pour augmenter les objectifs que le Canada avait promis à Paris. Mais la réalité est claire. Le Canada n'a pas répondu aux objectifs de Paris. À Glasgow, M. Trudeau promet des normes plus strictes pour diminuer les gaz à effet de serre, mais les émissions continuent d'augmenter. Alors, que faut-il faire? Le NPD exige que le gouvernement mette en place un plan des investissements pour le développement des énergies renouvelables. M. Trudeau doit s'engager envers les travailleurs du secteur de l'énergie et à utiliser leurs compétences pour assurer la transition vers une nouvelle économie énergétique. La réponse à la crise climatique doit être basée sur la collaboration avec les travailleurs, les travailleuses et leurs familles. Et c'est nécessaire pour le gouvernement de mettre en place un plan des investissements massifs pour le Canada devient un leader dans la lutte pour la justice climatique. I will turn it over to my colleague from Edmonton now.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Heather McPherson, and I am the Member of Parliament for Edmonton Strathcona. And I have to tell you that what I have been fighting for in the House of Commons since I have been elected is a strong future for Alberta. Alberta is facing a dual crisis. And this is a crisis that we have been seeing coming down the road for a very, very long time. And that crisis is a climate crisis, a climate emergency, but also an economic crisis. Unlike any other region of this country, Alberta is facing an economic devastation if we do not do what needs to be done to invest in our workers. If we do not do what needs to be done to invest in a new economy for Alberta. You know, I am a proud Albertan. My dad was a trucker. I grew up with oil and gas workers sitting around my kitchen table. And I can tell you that those oil and gas workers, they helped build this country. Alberta contributed to the building of the Canadian economy to Canada. And we are now in a situation where if we do not invest, if we do not support those workers in Alberta, we will not be able to meet our climate targets. There is no ability for Canada to meet our climate targets, for Canada to reinvent itself in a new future-looking economy if we leave Alberta behind. And what I'm seeing from this federal government is a failure to invest in Alberta, a failure to invest to the scale and the scope that we need to ensure that the economy in Alberta can go forward, that workers in Alberta can use their skills and their expertise to build a new economy, and that Alberta doesn't get left behind. So I'm happy to take questions from you all today, but my fight in the House of Commons for the last 2 years and continues to be to get help for the workers of Alberta. And I want to thank Charlie Angus for all the incredible work he has done to push for this. Thank you.
Good morning, guys. David Aiken from Global News.
Good morning, David Aiken.
Good morning, Charlie. Heather, I wonder if I can get you to put your foreign affairs critic hat on just for a bit. We had the news this morning that Ambassador Barton will leave his post as ambassador to China at the end of the year. And so that gives us an opportunity. I wonder if you have some thoughts about Ambassador Barton's time in China, and where do you see the government's handling of the relationship with China at this point?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the question. And I think we, as Canadians, we all thank the ambassador for the work that he's done. Certainly his work getting the two Michaels back onto Canadian soil is wonderful, was wonderful news. However, you know, we still have Canadians that are being held hostage in China. And I think that the government has been weak on developing a plan for China, and I'd certainly like to see a stronger plan going forward to ensure that our relationship with China, you know, moves in the right direction. So I'll thank the ambassador for his work. I look forward to the next ambassador being announced, and hopefully a stronger, more coherent, more holistic plan on China.
Watching the Harper government over its decade struggle with the Chinese relationship, at first it sort of placed human rights, or seemed to place a more emphasis on human rights, democracy, rule of law. But by the end of that, it recognized that, particularly for Western Canada, a lot of stuff is sold to China, canola, energy products, and it sort of tilted back towards a commercial relationship. seems the Trudeau government started out that way too. It wants to do free trade with China, all sorts of things. So how do you find the balance? Would you tend to emphasize, a country that is committing a genocide against Uyghurs over energy exports?
Well, I think when we do that dichotomy, that's a bit of a mistake. Of course, we need to be looking at human rights issues. Of course, we have to act on the fact that there is a genocide happening right now in the world. We are a country that cherishes human rights, that cherishes the rule of international law. So having a genocide being perpetrated against people in this world means that Canada has to speak up against that, has to push on that. But we also have a number of tools within our toolbox. We can be using soft diplomacy. We can be using a number of different tools to make sure that our relationship with China is productive and that we are bringing China back on the side of international law. And I'll also say, Canada is a middle power. We clearly need to work with our allies. We clearly need to work with others in Europe, with our friends in the United States, to bring China back on that side of international law. That said, it's complex, and this is a complex issue, and it will require some very serious hard work by this government that I, to be perfectly honest, don't feel it has been accomplished.
Hi, it's Annie Bergeron-Oliver with CTV National News. My question is also for you, if that's okay, Ms. McPherson. I'm just going to follow up on David's question. The Americans are expected to announce today that they're going to have a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics. Do you think that this is something Canada should do as well?
I do, and there's a few reasons why I think we need to boycott, have a diplomatic boycott. Part of it is that, frankly, I'm banned from China. We have parliamentarians in our House of Commons that have been banned by the Chinese government. That means that if we did send a diplomatic mission, that China, in fact, is choosing who gets to go on that mission, because we have members of our House of Commons who have lost the ability to be part of that mission. That in and of itself, to me, is problematic. But also, I think that there's huge problems having the Olympics in Beijing, knowing that there's genocide happening in that country, knowing that our government has voted unanimously and our opposition, our House of Parliament, has voted unanimously on that genocide. So I think that we need to send a message to Beijing that the world is watching, the world is paying attention, that we are not going to allow this to go unchallenged.
Great. And second question, it can be for either one of you. The Finance Committee today is going to be looking at the new pandemic aid package that the government has proposed. Freeland is supposed to be up today talking about it. I know the NDP has said that they are not in favor of ending any of the pandemic benefits in this transition. I'm wondering what you want to hear from the Deputy Prime Minister today.
We certainly, the issue of how pandemic spending is taking place is a vital question for Canadians. This is something we need answers for. I'm really pleased that the Finance Committee is meeting, because the Prime Minister hasn't shown any willingness to have any of the other committee meetings come forward. The Deputy Prime Minister needs to send a message that the government understands that we are not out of COVID by any means at all. We are still seeing major uncertainty. I was just speaking with workers who work from home right now, who are in the travel agencies, travel business. Travel is being hit. Tourism is facing major hit. Restaurants are hanging by a thread. And we need to remember as well that many businesses have burned through their savings and their capital. So if we're hit by any further downturns come January, it will have a huge impact. The government has to do the heavy lifting to get people to the other side. I want to hear that the Deputy Prime Minister is willing to be there for Canadian workers and small business.
Hi, David Thurton from CBC News. I'm just help me understand this. So what is the path forward that you're proposing for workers? Are you proposing like a specific dollar amount that you'd like to see the government give to Alberta to support workers each year? Are you going to be proposing legislation? Do you see an opportunity through the Just Transition legislation the government has been promising to table and to have debates on? We haven't seen it. Can you specifically tell us what do you think the path forward here is?
When we recognize that Canada has fallen to the bottom of the G20, the very bottom on investments in renewables, and we are an energy-producing nation, that is scandalous, that we are at the bottom of the G7 on dealing with our emissions targets. We're saying to the Prime Minister, you don't get to go to Paris and make grand pronouncements unless you have a clear plan. That clear plan must include workers, because it's about making the investments in the new energy economy. We have huge potential in Alberta with geothermal. We could be putting workers on the ground right now. Hydrogen in Edmonton, there's huge plans underway. Where is the federal government? So we're saying to the Prime Minister, he needs to be realistic. In order for us to get to a clean energy transition, it has to include workers. And one of the reasons that we're speaking up today on Alberta, but certainly for energy workers in Saskatchewan and Newfoundland as well, is that we have an incredible level of expertise in Canada's energy sector. So rather than fighting the old battles of the 20th century, why are we not using them, these workers and their skills for the 21st century? We haven't seen any of that kind of language from the Prime Minister. I challenge Seamus O'Regan, why don't you move to Calgary? If you're going to be the Labour Minister where the transition is already happening, set your office up in Calgary and start working with them now. Wilkinson, get out there to Edmonton and Fort Mac. Start working on the ground, because right now we're hearing talk, and talk's not getting us anywhere.
Okay. I wanted to ask both of you about a story that my colleague Kyle Bax has out. It's top of our website right now. It's about the federal government has begun developing regulations to allow oil sands sites to release basically treated tailings water back into, the environment, into the Athabasca River. What's your response to that, and what's your response, especially knowing that, these are huge tailings ponds, and there are worries about the structural integrity, and if we just keep storing the water there, those worries about the structural integrity of that water is just going to grow. So what is your thoughts on that, given that the solution isn't just as easy as just saying, don't release the water?
Well, I think the issue here is that, certainly in the last year with the high price of gas, the oil companies have made extraordinary profits. We have 300 and some thousand abandoned orphaned wells in Alberta right now. We don't have a credible plan for the cleanup. We have huge tailings that will affect the Athabasca River. So if we're going to start talking about releasing water into the Athabasca River, we need to know that there is a strong financial commitment to total safety. Safety, number one. Environmental safety, number one. And these companies are responsible for that. To cry poor after making the kind of money they've made is not acceptable. I come from a region where we've seen devastation of waters, the Matachewan River from breaches and tailings dams. These tailing dams in northern Alberta are much larger. So the environmental cleanup we have to have a plan. And right now, I'm not feeling reassured that the government is saying, okay, we'll just release some water and we hope for the best. These companies made the money. They have to put it back into the environment. Is that?
May I?
Yes.
Thank you, David. That's a great question. I met with Chief Adams from the Athabasca Fort Chip Nation just a little while ago, and imagine living downstream from those tailing ponds and what they are facing. Now, one of my big concerns has been that during COVID, water testing in that area was shut down. It was deemed too dangerous to do water testing in that area. Not too dangerous to continue to do, oil exploration and whatnot, but too dangerous to test the water. So there's a lot of problems with even just the way the process is being done. As Charlie said, we need to have these companies committing to do this as safely as possible and to reclaiming the spaces that are damaged, that there needs to be more effort being put into that. The companies know how to do this. We've been calling on the government time and time again when it comes to things like cleanup, that there are strings attached, that we are ensuring that money is going to where it needs to go, that it is protecting workers, that it is protecting the environment. And time again, the government has failed to do that. The money goes to the CEOs. The cleanup doesn't happen. Everything is done at a much lower level of quality than we need to see. And frankly, for those living downstream of those tailings ponds, they have been calling for action on this. They have seen this train coming down the tracks for a very, very long time. And so the fact that we're in a situation now where we have not dealt with it for decades is a full failure on the behalf of both the Liberal and previous Conservative government.
Now I'll check on the phone. Operator, do we have a question on the phone?
Thank you. Merci. If you have a question and you're using a speakerphone, please lift your handset before making your selection. If you have a question, please press star 1 on the device's keypad. You may cancel your question at any time by pressing star 2. So please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. There will be a brief pause while the participants register. Nous allons maintenant prendre des questions du téléphone. Si vous utilisez le téléphone main libre, s'il vous plaît, soulevez le combiné avant d'effectuer votre sélection. Si vous désirez poser une question, veuillez s'il vous plaît appuyer sur les touches étoile 1 de votre appareil. Vous pouvez à tout moment annuler votre question en appuyant sur les touches étoile 2. Alors, s'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. Il y aura un court délai vous permettant de vous enregistrer dans la file d'attente pour la période de questions. Merci de patienter. Once again, please press star 1 on the device's keypad if you have a question. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas à faire étoile 1 sur votre appareil pour toute question. There are no questions registered at this time on the phone. Il n'y a pas de questions en ce moment sous téléphone. I'll return the call back to the floor, de retour à la salle.
Can I just take a minute here and thank the hardworking journalists of Ottawa who came through that rotten weather this morning? We know who are the ones who are really serious. We know who are the ones who will not be defied by cheap answers and spin, who actually show up. So thank you for risking your lives to just come and hear Heather McPherson and myself this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I just ask just a question on a totally different topic?
Sure.
The Canada Water Agency, that was mentioned once again in the throne speech. Do you see the establishment of this new agency as an opportunity to really tackle this important issue about whether it's water safety, whether it's the future of water given climate change, whether it is, access to clean water in northern communities like yours? Do you have any thoughts on what the mandate of this agency should be? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but, it seems...
They promise a lot of things in this
speech. I think what we really have come to understand, seeing what happens on the ground, is that it doesn't matter how many agencies and commissions Ottawa establishes, unless there's actually powers to ensure accountability, then this will be just another in a long line of failures. When you're looking at communities like Niskandaga, like Attawapiskat, where government can't ensure simple access to clean water amidst some of the most beautiful lakes in the world, there's a huge failure. In terms of the climate crisis, water will become one of, I think, the fundamental issues, either from flooding or from drought. I would like to see this this water agency actually have some teeth to be able to launch investigations, to examine where the problems are, and to have accountability mechanisms that they could bring to Parliament in the way that we would, say, with one of the parliamentary officers. So if the government's willing to do that, which I doubt, we will be fully on board. If it's just another agency, we already got a lot of them. Thank you.
Thank you.
We say, should I just buy a plane ticket? Should we just plan on flying? And I'm just wondering, obviously you can't say specifically, but if you had to hedge your bets, and if you wanted to go there, would you just buy a plane ticket?
Well, all I'm saying is that right now we've been able to restore some highway access, but the main interior route continues to be the number 3, and we're prioritizing that for commercial vehicles. So I can't give a date about when that might be reopened to general travel. A lot of this is tied to progress we're trying to make on Highway 5, but we will update the public. I know I've heard that there are people traveling through the United States to get back into other parts of Canada. There are some ways to get there. We're working with the transportation sector, including the airline industry, to look at additional flights from Abbotsford Airport, Vancouver Airport, Victoria, to destinations in the interior of the province, Kelowna, Kamloops, and there's lots of regular connections to places like Calgary. The airline industry is obviously interested in seeing what kind of additional regional and holiday service they can provide, so we'll keep updating on what the industry is doing in terms of adding flights that may be able to help people with their holiday plans.
Follow-up, Lisa?
Just a quick one to clarify with Minister Farnworth. So we'll hear around the 14th if that gas restriction is going to be extended or not. Is that correct?
The order is in place until the 14th, and we are working with TMX, Trans Mountain, and monitoring the situation very closely. And I think we want to do, we will lift it as soon as we are able. The order expires on the 14th, and if we can lift it sooner, we will lift it sooner.
Dirk Meisner, Canadian Press.
Hi, Minister Farnworth. Can you go over again what you said earlier about the military? Are most of them leaving now?
Yeah, much of the Canadian forces are now transitioning to back to their traditional and Canadian forces responsibilities, but there will still be a contingent of about 126 based in Chilliwack that will be on standby to assist in emergency situations.
Dirk, do you have a follow-up?
Sure. For Minister Farnworth again, when he goes to Merritt tomorrow, what will he tell some of the people who basically looks like their homes are destroyed? How would you help them?
Well, we have been ensuring that emergency support services are there in place. We put in place the $2,000 to assist individuals. We will be working with the local community in terms of repairing the infrastructure that has been damaged and working to ensure that we build that community back stronger and better to be better prepared for the future.
Our last question today is from Tyler Olson, Fraser Valley Current.
Yeah, thanks. You mentioned Highway 3, and there's been talk about that. Right now, you can't travel on Highway 3 to see family or for work. Would you consider broadening the definition of essential travel to allow trips of that nature that maybe aren't as discretionary as going to a ski hill, but for many people are quite important to their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, it's going to be the same answer, Tyler. Highway 3 is designated now for commercial trucks. We need that vital link to the supply chain that focuses on making it as safe as possible. We're working with the trucking industry, for example, to get to a zero accident point and working with the industry closely on making that safe. We've got winter conditions, we've enhanced the maintenance on Highway 3, but in terms of opening up the restrictions that are in place to general travel. We can't do that at this point in time, but we will update communities that can be connected by Highway 3 about whether that essential order will change and approximately when. But today there's really no timeline on that. For the time being, we need trucks to be able to get through from the Lower Mainland to the interior and back again. That's a critically important thing for people to be able to access goods and also to keep our economy going. There's a lot of companies, manufacturers, construction companies, others whose jobs and ability to remain open as a business depend on goods getting through Highway 3 right now.
Do you have a follow-up, Tyler?
Yeah, for Minister Farnworth, does the province need to reassess the allocation of resources in Hope, given that the community is a bit of a choke point, and we've seen it often has to deal with unforeseen events with very few resources?
We work with communities right across the province in terms of when it comes to dealing with emergency measures and the situations that are arriving. It's one of the critical reasons why we are doing the complete overhaul of the Emergency Program Act to ensure that it meets the need not just of the challenges we're facing now, but climate change challenges that we're going to be facing in the future. And this is the most significant overhaul of that legislation since 1993. And as I've said before, it's all started around us being the first province in this country, along with the federal government, to sign on to the Sendai framework, so that we're no longer just focusing on response and recovery, but just as much on prevention and mitigation, as well as response and recovery. And so that is going to enable us to be doing significantly more in the future. And I expect that work has been ongoing.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Good morning. La date de 6 décembre 1989 sera à jamais gravée dans notre mémoire, mais aussi dans notre cœur. Ce jour-là, 32 ans passés, 14 femmes ont été froidement assassinées, uniquement car elles étaient des femmes. Aujourd'hui, la population du Canada et du Québec se souvient des victimes de Polytechnique. Cette forme de tragédie ne doit plus jamais se reproduire. Nous le devons aux victimes. While the holidays are quickly approaching, there is still no plan to tackle many of the challenges facing our country. This is supposed to be a time to celebrate with family and friends, but Canadian families are worried. Worried about rising costs, worried about housing, worried about what all this means for their family, and most importantly, worried that no help is coming. But as I've said before, Canada's Conservatives are here to be a voice for the millions of Canadians left behind in Justin Trudeau's economy. Pour les familles qui vont mettre moins de cadeaux sous le sapin cette année. Pour les étudiants qui veulent étirer chaque dollar pour faire le plein d'essence pour rentrer à la maison. Et pour les personnes âgées qui vont choisir les produits d'épicerie selon leur budget pour remplir leur garde-manger. These are everyday examples of skyrocketing inflation. It makes life less affordable for everyone. It affects every Canadian. Yet the Liberals have put forward no plan to address it. As the Prime Minister has said, he doesn't think about monetary policy. This isn't about numbers in ledgers. It's about the impact the Trudeau government's mismanagement is having on people. Le Canada traverse une crise du logement. Les prix des maisons et des loyers sont de plus en plus chers. Combien de jeunes familles sont incapables de s'acheter une première maison, comme leurs parents et leurs grands-parents avant eux? Plusieurs sont même forcés de quitter les quartiers ou les localités où elles ont grandi, faute de logements abordables. This week, Canada's Conservatives will hold Justin Trudeau's government to account for economic failures. They have left Canadians behind in their high tax, high debt agenda, and they've left people behind in Afghanistan who are at risk because they helped Canada. Tomorrow, Conservatives are calling for the creation of a special committee to review the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban. Cette semaine, les conservateurs du Canada vont demander au gouvernement Trudeau de rendre des comptes pour ces échecs. Demain, les conservateurs vont demander la création d'un comité spécial chargé d'étudier la chute de l'Afghanistan aux mains des talibans. They had months to plan for U.S. troops pulling out of Afghanistan, to plan for what that would mean for Canadians on the ground and Afghans on the ground who fought or served alongside Canada. Yet the Liberal government has brought less than 10% of the Afghan refugees to Canada that they promised. They called a pandemic election when Justin Trudeau should have been showing leadership. This committee will help Canadians understand why they failed to act. Rhetoric and empty promises are what we've heard from this government at a time that Canadians desperately need progress. And on Thursday, we will hold the Trudeau government to account for their failure to address the cost of living crisis that is pricing families out of their homes and driving up the cost of everyday goods. All of this while wages across the country are stagnant. Comme opposition officielle, nous allons être la voix des millions de Canadiens que l'économie de Justin Trudeau abandonne tous les jours. Nous allons défendre nos alliés en Afghanistan qui souffrent sous le régime des talibans. Et nous allons nous battre pour offrir à chaque région et à chaque secteur les outils nécessaires pour relancer l'économie dont ils ont besoin. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. I'm ready for some questions.
Oui, bonjour, Lina Dib, la presse canadienne. Monsieur O'Toole, vous dénoncez le format hybride des travaux parlementaires. Vous avez dit que tous vos députés seraient là en personne. Et même quand des ministres se présentent à l'écran, vous les huez, vous et vos députés. Alors, j'aimerais comprendre pourquoi est-ce que 4 de vos députés n'ont pas été là en personne toute la semaine hier et ont participé de façon virtuelle au débat.
Comme vous le savez, on a lutté pour une parlement régulier, pas un hybride, pas un parlement par Zoom. Mais malheureusement, l'NPD et les libéraux ont travaillé ensemble pour un parlement hybride. Maintenant, on va pousser pour le retour des comités, pour les débats et pour la transparence, parce qu'on va utiliser le Parlement hybride, mais maintenant, c'est très important pour notre parti d'avoir les comités, d'étudier les défis devant nous.
Vous ne répondez pas du tout à ma question. Je vous parle de 4 de vos députés qui ne se sont pas présentés en personne. Je voudrais savoir si c'est en lien avec leur statut vaccinal.
Comme vous le savez, il y a 6 mois, j'ai dit, tous nos députés vont suivre les règles sanitaires. C'était le cas depuis les débuts de la pandémie et on va suivre les règles maintenant. C'est important aussi d'avoir une approche professionnelle en ce qui concerne la pandémie et l'information sur les vaccins, sur les mesures sanitaires. Tous nos députés vont suivre les règles, incluant ici sur la colline.
Donc, leurs exemptions vaccinales qu'ils avaient présentées et qui doivent être contre-vérifiées à cause de la motion qui était adoptée, elles n'étaient pas vraies, elles n'étaient pas correctes à ces 4 députés-là?
Comme j'ai dit, tous nos députés vont suivre les règles. Si vous avez des questions pour les 4 députés, posez les questions. Mais comme chef, j'ai dit, c'est très important pour tous les Canadiens de se faire vacciner et d'avoir une approche de division des questions sur la situation personnelle d'un Canadien. C'est une question pour chaque personne. Mais les vaccins sont primordiaux dans notre lutte et j'ai des attentes pour mon équipe d'avoir une approche professionnelle et toujours suivre les règles.
David Aiken, Global News, good morning. With the news that Ambassador Barton will be leaving his post, I wondered if you had some thoughts on his tenure as our ambassador to China and what sort of opportunity, if any, that might give the government to take a look at the Canada-China relationship and where it ought to put its focus on that relationship.
Well, thank you, David. The Trudeau government has mishandled the relationship with China since the early days of Mr. Trudeau's time as Prime Minister. I'd like to thank Mr. Barton for his service. We had no ambassador for almost a year in between Mr. Barton and Mr. McCallum, who had to resign because of failures to be transparent with respect to the situation with the 2 Michaels. So I don't think there's any Canadian who doesn't feel that Canadian relations with China are a mess. What we need to have is a principle-based approach that shows that our economic interests in China will not dominate our concerns about human rights, whether for the Uyghurs, the situation in Hong Kong, tensions with respect to Taiwan. We should be working with our allies, and I would hope Mr. Trudeau puts a professional, experienced diplomat in that post, not a friend of the Liberal Party. La situation avec la Chine et le Canada était un désastre après 6 ans de M. Trudeau. J'aimerais remercier M. Barton pour son travail, mais c'était un désastre avant lui avec M. McCallum et la situation avec les 2 Michael. On doit avoir une approche sérieuse sur l'économie et sur nos valeurs. Et la situation avec les Uyghurs, la situation à Hong Kong, on a des inquiétudes en ce qui concerne la Chine. Et c'est le temps pour un diplomate professionnel, pas un ami de le Parti libéral.
And given on the specific issue of the Olympics, given that the House of Commons did affirm that a genocide is occurring in Xinjiang, do you think a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics is sufficient, or should we also let our athletes know that World Championships, Commonwealth Games are also pretty special, and maybe this Olympics is not that special?
This is an important question, David, and it's something I've struggled with because I've been speaking over months with Canadian Olympic Committee athletes, Olympic representatives like Mr. Pound and others, to try and see how we can express our profound displeasure with the conduct of the regime in China without hurting the athletes. We're all proud of the men and women who train so hard to wear our maple leaf. They should also wear our values abroad as well. So we've been proposing moving the games. There wasn't any interest by the Trudeau government in that. We've proposed a diplomatic boycott. I think that's the best thing we can do alongside our allies to show pressure, but not to make the athletes pay the price for the conduct in Beijing.
Hi, Annie Bergeron-Oliver with CTV National News. I'm just going to follow up on my colleague's question. The rule on the Hill is that you must be fully vaccinated to be here present. As she mentioned, 4 members were not present last week. They were virtual only. So does that mean they are not fully vaccinated?
As I've said from the beginning, all of our MPs will follow the rules. They have since the beginning of the pandemic, right from the start when we went to reduce sittings, when we went to hybrid parliament, and with respect to vaccinations, distancing, and everything else. As the rules change over the Hill, we will make sure that we're always not just meeting, but exceeding those rules. MPs do have the ability to access the hybrid parliament, something we opposed because it can be used by the Trudeau government to hide from accountability. And all MPs have that flexibility if they're not in Ottawa, as long as hybrid is available. And some of those questions are best referred to those MPs.
The Globe is reporting today that you have called for a probe into allegations of staff mistreatment by Shannon Stubbs. When did you learn about the allegations, and what are you hoping this probe produces?
I learned about the allegations on Friday when I was in Quebec on tour. I've referred them to the House of Commons because they're allegations, but they're of a serious nature. As I've been leader for a year, I've set an expectation on all my MPs that we will have a professional and respectful workplace environment. I have that expectation because we haven't seen that from the Liberal Party, which has covered up allegations that came in through their caucus. If we're going to hold them to account, we have to make sure that we are welcoming people to work on Parliament Hill free of any form of harassment or a bad workplace. These are allegations at present, but I've asked the House of Commons to investigate them.
Mr. O'Toole, Ryan Templeton, National Post. You were talking about inflation there, and clearly you want to make an issue of that this week in the House. Your party has suggested that the Liberal spending over the last couple of years has driven that inflation. Much of that spending went to Canadians in the form of CERB, in the form of the wage subsidy and the rent subsidy programs. I'm wondering where over the last 2 years you think the Liberals spent too much.
Well, the Liberals kept in place the programs they put in place at the start of the pandemic, the first wave. I think all Canadians have learned to deal and adapt with COVID. We're now in the fourth wave aftermath, and we had complaints about them keeping the programs in place too long, including the CERB. The first interview I gave a year ago as leader of the Conservative Party, I said the CERB should not just be blanketly applied across the country when we have a labor shortage. They paid $600 million, Ryan, I think I read in your paper, for 15-year-olds to stay home. So there was massive overspending that was much beyond what was needed to be done during COVID. We should have preserved as many jobs as possible, not preserved a benefit far longer than it was needed. It's the reason we have a major workplace shortage in Canada right now. We had 1 million job vacancies in September, largely due to the Liberals' mismanagement of those programs.
And you mentioned as well this committee that you were looking to structure. Are you looking for something similar to the Canada-China committee that has been running for the past 2 years now?
We think the Afghanistan study would be shorter, Ryan. The real failure of the Trudeau government was not using the last few years and not using the last 6 months to get people out of harm's way in Afghanistan that were going to be at risk when the Taliban was re-exerting control. Years ago, I got a translator out through Minister McCallum, but every minister since then under the Trudeau government has completely failed in Afghanistan. And I want to thank the volunteers, the hundreds of veterans who stepped up and filled the void left by the Trudeau government. Ordinary Canadians were going out and bringing these people to safety because their own government had failed and dropped the ball. So I think this committee will get to the bottom of it, but I do see it being time limited, unlike the Canada-China committee.
Ian Bailey, Globe and Mail. Further to the matter about MP Stubbs, will you ask Ms. Stubbs to step aside from caucus while this matter is looked at, and have you provided any direction to her while the matter is being reviewed?
As I said, I was made aware of the allegations on Friday while I was on tour, and we've We've referred them to be examined. They are allegations at the moment, and we will work with Ms. Stubbs on the process. The important thing for me, Ian, is to make sure that we send a signal that the expectation we have for everyone that works on the Hill and every single person in this precinct, that they should be treated with respect, and we should create professional workplaces that people want to come from across the country to work in. So that's my expectation. It's why I've referred the matter as soon as the allegations were brought to my attention.
Is there a need for a more independent process to look at these kinds of workplace allegations in the parliamentary precinct in the House of Commons?
Well, it's early days from we've referred the matter, having learned about it on Friday. But we have, as leaders, to set the tone. And this is what I challenged Mr. Trudeau to do, because clearly there were some allegations in the last Parliament related to one of his MPs that the Prime Minister's office and Mr. Holland, when he was whip, sat on. So much so that we were hearing from former Liberal staffers because they felt their concerns weren't being taken seriously by their own party. So we have to set a tone as leaders of our party, that Parliament Hill should be an example of a professional workplace with a cross-section of Canadians from all parts of their country that want to serve their country. That's my expectations, but as I said, these are allegations at the moment, and they're being examined.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole, Olivier Ferron-Boissé de TVA. Justement là-dessus, vous parliez d'un exemple à instaurer pour en matière d'allégations, d'harcèlement et ces choses-là. Ben, comment ça se fait que votre bureau était au courant qu'il y avait des allégations contre Mme Stubbs en janvier et que vous décidiez d'agir en décembre seulement, donc presque un an plus tard, quand les journalistes s'intéressent à la question?
On a reçu les allégations spécifiques vendredi, quand j'étais au Québec pendant une tournée là-bas. Et les allégations sont sérieuses. Et j'ai référé les allégations à la Chambre de commerce, la Chambre de communes, parce qu'on doit avoir une examination professionnelle. Mais comme j'ai dit, c'est seulement les allégations maintenant, et on va travailler avec la députée sur l'examination.
J'aimerais vous entendre à nouveau sur la démission de l'ambassadeur en Chine, un peu sur le contexte, parce que, bon, vous parliez plutôt du boycott diplomatique pour les Jeux olympiques, mais il y a également d'autres gros enjeux. Je pense à celui de Huawei, le gouvernement prendre une décision. Donc, dans ce contexte-là, vous pensez quoi un peu du timing de la démission de M. Barton?
C'était une surprise, les nouvelles avec M. Barton ce matin. Et comme j'ai dit, j'apprécie les efforts de nos diplomats à travers le monde. Mais la situation avec la Chine, sous le gouvernement de M. Trudeau, est un désastre. On a des inquiétudes en ce qui concerne les Ouïghours, la situation à Hong Kong. C'est pourquoi on a besoin d'un diplomate professionnel, pas un ami de le Parti libéral. Et pour les Olympiques, c'est approprié d'avoir un boycott diplomatique pour respecter nos athlètes, mais d'envoyer un message clair.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. For the past many months, we've been in conversation with partners and allies around the world on the issue of the Beijing Olympic and Paralympic Games. As a country, indeed, as many partners around the world, we are extremely concerned by the repeated human rights violations by the Chinese government. That is why we are announcing today that we will not be sending any diplomatic representation to the Beijing Olympic or Paralympic Games this winter. Our athletes have been training for years and are looking forward to compete at the highest level against athletes from around the world, and they will continue to have all of our fullest support as they show the extraordinary success that Canada has at Winter Olympic Games. Ça fait des mois qu'on est en train de coordonner et de discuter de cet enjeu, de l'enjeu des Jeux olympiques et paralympiques avec nos alliés à travers le monde. Nous sommes profondément troublés par les violations de la droit de la personne du gouvernement de la Chine. C'est pourquoi nous annonçons aujourd'hui que nous n'allons pas envoyer de représentants diplomatiques aux Jeux olympiques et paralympiques de Pékin cet hiver. Nos athlètes continueront d'avoir tout l'appui du gouvernement canadien en compétition contre les meilleurs autres athlètes du monde. On a bien hâte de les voir réussir dans ces Jeux olympiques et paralympiques.
Prime Minister, Canada's relationship with China is still very tense. What retaliation do you fear from China vis-a-vis Canada for this decision?
I don't think the decision by Canada or by many other countries to choose to not send diplomatic representation to the Beijing Olympics and Paralympics is going to come as a surprise to China. We have been very clear over the past many years of our deep concerns around human rights violations, and this is a continuation of us expressing our deep concerns for human rights violations. Je pense que le gouvernement chinois est très au courant des préoccupations que le Canada et nos alliés ont depuis des années sur l'état des droits de la personne en Chine. Ce ne devrait pas être une surprise qu'on a pris la décision de ne pas envoyer de représentation diplomatique aux Jeux olympiques et paralympiques à Pékin.
M. Trudeau, la Chine ne s'est jamais gênée pour détenir des gens arbitrairement. Le Canada, c'est mieux que quiconque. Comment allez-vous assurer la sécurité des athlètes? Puis, quel est votre message pour les athlètes, pour les Canadiens qui ressentent une certaine inquiétude?
Tout d'abord, je veux souligner que le travail que nous avons pu faire pour ramener les deux Michael qui ont été détenus en Chine de façon arbitraire, ça n'a pas juste été le Canada qui a fait ce travail-là, c'était nos partenaires, nos alliés et des pays, des tiers pays partout dans le monde qui ont souligné leurs préoccupations. Et c'est pour ça d'ailleurs qu'il y a tellement de pays dans le monde qui ont signé notre initiative sur la détention arbitraire parce que c'est une préoccupation que les gens ont partout dans le monde. Et nous allons continuer de souligner à quel point on ne peut pas utiliser la détention arbitraire comme outil diplomatique. Par rapport à la sécurité de nos athlètes, je peux vous assurer que tout sera fait par le Canada et nos alliés pour assurer que nos athlètes peuvent se concentrer sur une chose et une chose seulement aux Olympiques et aux Paralympiques, c'est-à-dire de bien représenter le Canada et de gagner. Leur job, c'est de faire ça. C'est pour ça qu'ils s'entraînent depuis des années. On va être là pour les appuyer dans tout le reste. It's been very clear that concerns around arbitrary detention are real and are shared by many, many dozens of countries around the world, which is why we saw such tremendous participation and sign on to our declaration against arbitrary detention. We will continue to stand very, very clearly as a world against the use of coercive diplomacy and tools like arbitrary detention. At the same time, we will be there, absolutely, as countries, as a country, but as a world as well, to support all the athletes gathering in Beijing over this coming winter. We know that our athletes need to have one thing in mind, that is, representing their countries to the best of their ability and winning that gold medal for Canada. They will be focused on that. We will do everything necessary to ensure their safety and ensure that they are able to focus single-mindedly on bringing home the gold for Canada. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire assurer la sécurité par tous les moyens? Madame Saint-Onge, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire assurer la sécurité des athlètes par tous les moyens? Est-ce quelles mesures concrètes vous allez mettre en place?
Merci tout le monde. Ça me fait plaisir de vous voir. Je pense, Henri, la première, en réponse à ta question, c'est tout dans l'intérêt du pays hôte d'assurer la sécurité des athlètes du Canada, mais de partout à travers le monde. Quant à la sécurité des athlètes en soi, je laisserai ma collègue répondre, mais je pense qu'au niveau diplomatique, c'est évident que c'est dans l'intérêt de la Chine de protéger nos athlètes.
Ça fait des mois, voire des années que le Comité olympique et paralympique canadien se prépare à ces Jeux-là. Toutes les dispositions vont être prises pour assurer la sécurité des athlètes. Je suis en étroite collaboration, évidemment, avec ma collègue des Affaires étrangères, également avec Marco Mendicino, pour s'assurer que le Canada prend ses responsabilités pour assurer la sécurité des athlètes. Mais vous savez, le Comité olympique et paralympique canadien est en constante discussion aussi avec le Comité olympique international. Donc, c'est à plusieurs niveaux que la sécurité des athlètes est assurée et tout est mis en place pour que ce soit le cas.
Ça veut dire quoi? Est-ce que vous envoyez des agents de sécurité? Je ne sais pas. Ça veut dire quoi?
Ben, en fait, dernière chose, Marie, bien entendu, les services consulaires vont être offerts à nos athlètes sur place. Et l'autre chose aussi, c'est que lorsque ma collègue Pascale Saint-Onge réfère au fait qu'elle travaille avec Marco Mendicino, bien entendu, on va vouloir s'assurer que la sécurité des athlètes est assurée, mais aussi qu'on travaille avec la GRC.
Say you're going to assure the security of Canadian athletes. Is Canada prepared to send security detail from the RCMP abroad? Are you relying on the Chinese to secure our athletes?
So in the past, the RCMP has worked with the Canadian Olympic Committee to make sure to ensure the safety of our athletes. In this particular situation, it is obvious that we want to make sure that our athletes have access to protection services, and that's why we'll be working with the RCMP. But also, we will be liaising with our embassies and missions across China because we want to make sure that our diplomatic services, our consular services on site are there to help our athletes.
Mais ça veut dire qu'il y a plus d'agents de la GRC, par exemple, qui vont être déployés, étant donné que c'est une situation qui est davantage à haut risque? Est-ce que les athlètes vont être escortés? C'est quoi le plan concret?
Ma collègue pourra répondre, mais concrètement, là, on va travailler avec le Comité olympique canadien, puis on va travailler avec la GRC, puis on peut s'assurer que la sécurité de nos athlètes va être là.
Est-ce que vous pouvez juste clarifier quand vous dites GRC, ça veut dire quoi? On en envoie en plus grand nombre, on escorte chaque athlète. Ils vont avoir quand même plusieurs dizaines, centaines d'athlètes. Comment on fait ça?
Il y a déjà des agents qui sont mobilisés pour assurer la sécurité, puis on continue les discussions avec la GRC, avec Marco Mendicino également pour assurer la sécurité des athlètes. Ce que je peux vous assurer, c'est que c'est ma priorité et on va mettre tout ce qu'il faut en place pour que nos athlètes soient en sécurité en Chine pendant les Jeux olympiques.
What is that going to look like? Or what kind of the RCMP presence going to look like in Beijing?
Il y a déjà des agents qui ont été. There's already agents that have been hired to ensure the security of the athletes, and we're still in discussion with the RCMP, with Marco Mendicino, and everything will be in place to make sure that the athletes are safe. That's our priority. It's my priority as Minister of Sports.
Sorry, can you start again? I didn't hear.
I just want to go back to what kind of message this sends. I mean, during the Tokyo Summer Olympics, we only sent one minister anyways as part of the Canadian delegation. I assume given COVID, it would have been just as small. So we're talking really about only sending one less person than we really otherwise would have. So how is this a strong signal to China?
Well, clearly, it is important for us to send a strong signal to China because we're extremely concerned with what is going on in terms of human rights allegations regarding the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. We've raised this issue at many forums, including at the G7, including with my colleagues at NATO. We also raised it before the United Nations, and Canada has been playing a leadership role on this. So this is just in line with our foreign policy regarding the fact that Canada always stands up on questions of human rights. And more than that, we are coordinating with our allies to continue to have more countries to send a strong message in the continent.
Qu'est-ce que ça va changer concrètement pour les gens?
Vas-y, Laurence. Laurence, oui.
Qu'est-ce que ça va changer concrètement pour les gens au Xinjiang, ce boycottage diplomatique, pour les gens concrètement là, dans leurs conditions?
Bien, concrètement, on a plusieurs pays au monde qui lancent un message clair à la Chine, que la violation des droits humains est inacceptable. Et donc, c'est pour ça qu'on travaille au niveau diplomatique, ensemble. C'est pour ça qu'on travaille en coalition. Et c'est une situation unique. Parce que, normalement, le Canada participe diplomatiquement aux Jeux olympiques et paralympiques. Ça fait partie du rôle des pays à travers le monde de participer à ces grands événements sportifs.
And why then, if you want to send such a strong signal, why not an athletic boycott? Are you too afraid to do an athletic boycott?
Well, our athletes have worked extremely hard to get there. They have trained hours, they've traveled the world, they've competed, and it's just normal for them to have the chance to really go ahead and compete in these Olympic Games. So this is a situation that needs to be dealt diplomatically, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Madame, juste pour revenir à la question de ma collègue, qu'est-ce que ça va donner? Aujourd'hui, la Chine a réagi à l'Australie, qui a boycotté elle aussi, en disant il n'était pas invité. De toute façon, we don't care whether or not Australia is there or not. Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas un risque que la Chine nous dise on s'en fout que vous soyez là ou pas, on continue business as usual?
Mais premièrement, ce sont les Olympiques d'hiver et les Paralympiques d'hiver. Le Canada est toujours très en vue lors de ces Olympiques-là parce qu'on est fiers et on est bon aux Jeux olympiques d'hiver. Et en ce sens-là, on va continuer de travailler avec plusieurs autres pays pour lancer un message clair. Je pense que vous pouvez vous attendre à voir d'autres pays qui vont lancer ce message-là. Et en passant, la rhétorique utilisée par le gouvernement chinois n'est pas nouvelle. Et on va continuer non seulement d'avoir des conversations avec eux, mais de contrecarrer cette rhétorique-là.
Will you try to get the rest of the G7 to sign on to this weekend at the foreign ministers meeting? 3 of the 7 are there. What about Germany, Italy, France, Japan?
So I was in Europe last week. I had conversations with many of my G7 counterparts, but also many of my colleagues within NATO and USCE. In every single meeting, I raised the question of the Olympics. There are still many countries studying the question, but clearly I want to make sure that as I'm heading to the G7 to Liverpool tomorrow, that I raise this issue, and I want to make sure that more countries in the world send a strong signal. Thank you.
Well, we've watched relations with China and Canada unfold over the past few years, especially under the guise of the Liberal federal government and Justin Trudeau. There are questions of how things were handled and how they could be maybe done a little bit better. Even the Prime Minister himself would question some of what happened, and he would even want to discuss how he might have been able to do things a little bit differently. China is at times a global problem. They are one of the biggest polluters of carbon, and while the U.S. and Canada fall in number 2 and number 3, that China seemingly has no intentions upon trying to curb what it is that they do, and they think that maybe they are beyond what it is the UN is asking for and what the rest of the global countries are asking for. So we need to do the right thing on our end as people. Write to your government officials, your elected officials, and tell them what you think should be happening with China. What you think should be happening with issues of human rights and climate change. And maybe make those letters not only focused on China, but make them focused on what could happen locally here in Canada on the same exact issues. So, thank you for listening today. You've been listening to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. listening today, and thank you for supporting us with our sponsors. Please go to depictions.media for more information and click on our contact link and let us know how we can help bring your story and help bring us to a better world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.